It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, failed by the police. An apology to the family of murdered sex worker Emma Caldwell. Her killer was jailed for at least 36 years today for dozens of crimes, including the rape of 9 other women. Earlier victims have told Sky News they were ignored by police, leaving a predator on the streets to kill. Also tonight, claims the government is actively harming victims of the infected blood scandal. 82 of them have died in the last year alone, with ministers accused of dragging their heels since compensation plans were published back in April. Campaigners took their fight to Westminster today, and I'm going to speak to one of them in just a moment. Red Bull Formula One boss Christian Horner is cleared of any wrongdoing after allegations of inappropriate behaviour. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris will be here. And a crisis that affects every single one of us and could be set to get far worse. Council bosses say neighbourhood services will be cut. That's despite a government bailout. And more than half of local authorities could go bust in the next 5 years. Well, that's to come, and much more on the UK Tonight. These women were part of our communities. They were important to their loved ones and should have been important to the police. The words of murder victim Emma Caldwell's family earlier today, as they criticised misogyny and corruption within Police Scotland, which ignored sex workers' warnings about Emma's killer 2 years before her death. Police apologised to the Caldwell family this afternoon as Iain Packer was finally convicted. A sex worker herself, Emma was murdered by serial rapist Packer in 2005. He has been sentenced to at least 36 years in prison for her murder and 32 other crimes of physical and sexual violence against 22 women. Our Scotland correspondent, Colin Gillis, has this report.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder. The spot where sex workers were attacked, where Emma Caldwell was strangled and dumped naked in this ditch.
Whether she had threatened to report you to the police or whether you killed her whilst acting out some evil fantasy, you murdered her in circumstances which must have been truly terrifying, alone with the man who had already indecently assaulted her, in the dark, deprived of her phone and miles from any prospect of help.
You have been arrested on suspicion of murder.
This is the moment Iain Packer was finally removed from the streets, prevented from harming again.
Who has raped women?
I've never raped any in my life.
Iain Packer was such a confident liar, he took part in this documentary protesting his innocence.
Not at all, I know nothing about it.
Did you kill Emma?
No, I never. I could look you in the eye and say no, I had nothing to do with it whatsoever.
That was the biggest lie of them all. But this court finally got to the truth. A predator guilty of one of the worst campaigns of sex crimes this country has ever seen.
I feel as if I can breathe again. This man is gone. And I hope he gets long enough that he can't harm anyone else. He'll always be the same, he's not going to change. It's my daughter. And I'm going to stand up for her. It didn't make any difference to me what she did. They made a mistake when they thought Emma wasn't worth anything, because Emma was worth an awful lot.
Packer was a familiar face here in the red light district over the decades, prowling the streets, a habitual user of sex workers. He was interviewed several times by police over the years and even admitted taking Emma from these streets down to the woods 40 miles away for sex. But it took them 17 years before he was eventually arrested, during which time he continued to abuse. But now Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent years before Emma was even murdered, and it appears nothing was done about it.
He tried to force me to my knees. I was terrified. I met 2 police officers that I knew. I told them about the attack and I got jailed for a Section 46, which is prostitution. They never took a statement.
For 2003, the police were getting warned about him. So back then, if the police had just listened to the girls who came forward and told them, a lot of the other sexual crimes would never have happened, and to be honest, Emma could still be alive. They just look down on us. I've been raped, I've been held hostage. Nothing would ever happen to the men. They've got blood in their hands.
Yes, they've got blood.
They have got blood in their hands for this.
A toxic culture of misogyny and corruption meant that the police failed so many women and girls who came forward to speak against Packer. Instead of receiving justice and compassion, they were humiliated, they were dismissed, and in some instances, they were arrested.
And now, an admission of failure.
Emma Caldwell, her family, and many other victims were let down by policing in 2005. For that, we are sorry. The lack of investigation until 2015 caused unnecessary distress to her family and all of those women who came forward to report sexual violence.
My Emma.
This has always been about Emma Caldwell and the pain endured by her mum for so long. She finally has justice.
What I really want, Emma.
Connor Gillis, Sky News, Glasgow.
That's what I really want.
Well, Nathalia Urban joins me now. She is coordinator of NUMBrella Lane, a Glasgow-based charity that provides community support for sex workers. Nathalia, that was hard to watch. Emma Caldwell's mum there. Emma's family have waited 19 years for this moment, and they were very clear. They blamed a toxic culture in the police force, in Police Scotland, for this long wait, a culture that failed women, and in particular, sex workers.
Good evening. Before anything, on behalf of NUMBrella Lane, on behalf of National Ugly Mugs, I would like to send our thoughts and our heartfelt everything that we are feeling right now for the family of Emma Caldwell, her mom, Margaret, her family, friends, her community, because what happened, unfortunately, was not an isolated case. National Ugly Mugs, which is the biggest charity that takes care of making sure sex workers are safe in the UK, show that we have 12 non-sex workers murdered in Glasgow and neither region since the 90s. And half of those cases remain unsolved. Another case of a sex worker took 22 years for a conviction. So Emma Caldwell today, the 19 years, that level of waiting, of torture that the family and the community and her friends went through is horrible, is appalling, and this cannot be happening anymore.
As part of the family statement, I just want to read some of it to you and get you to react to it. The family said the police failed many women and girls who came forward to speak up. Instead of getting justice, they were humiliated and dismissed, whilst gifting freedom to an evil predator to rape and rape again. Some police officers saw violence as part of the job of a sex worker. No woman, whatever her job, status or vulnerabilities, should be treated as disposable, as a second-class citizen. In response to that, Police Scotland have said that they have changed, that they have learned lessons. You speak to women on a daily basis who are sex workers in Scotland. What is their experience of how they are treated by the authorities?
We still see a culture of dismissing. We still see a culture of fear around the sex worker community in Scotland, of reporting a crime, not just for the way that the police will treat them as the criminals, not as victims, because of the stigma that exists around sex working in Scotland. Because there is no voice for sex workers in groups and organizations and in governmental levels that will actually hear from sex workers what they need, what they want. And there is also, unfortunately, a culture that doesn't respect sex work as an actual work. Instead, they are throwing the majority women, but men, trans people as well, into marginalization and leaving them open to deal with criminals like the one that unfortunately killed Emma Caldwell.
Yeah.
And this is so common. This is National Ugly Mugs did a research that we had 60% of the women that we researched, they still don't want that report crimes to us. They don't want to report crimes to the police because of the fear of the stigma and also the fear of being prosecuted for being sex workers.
Yeah, well, we know that one of the sex workers who raised the alarm about Emma's killer was not just ignored, but she was actually arrested. What do you want to happen? As Emma's mum said, this has all been about Emma. This has all been in her name. And, you know, Emma's murderer went to prison today, not just for the murder of Emma, but for crimes committed against 22 other women. What do you want to happen as a result of this conviction? Is it to open a conversation about sex work and sex workers, because it is happening not just in Glasgow but in cities up and down the UK?
Well, National Ugly Mugs, like I said, the largest sex worker victim support organisation in the UK, is calling for authorities. We are calling for politicians. We are calling for the police. We are calling for groups who put those workers into further marginalization, risking their lives, not inviting them to have an actual conversation of what sex workers want, what sex workers need. That's why it's time for groups like a model for Scotland, Equally Safe, MPs, MSPs, to sit with us, to sit with other organizations across UK that actually listen from sex workers, who actually work together to make sex workers do their work safely and take what we are bringing into consideration.
And Nathalia, really good to talk to you. Nathalia Urban, their coordinator of NUMBrella Lane, an organisation in Glasgow providing care and support for sex workers, as the Caldwell family put so eloquently in their statement. All women and girls matter. They're part of our communities. They're important to loved ones, families, friends, and should be important to the police. Nathalia, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. And just want to say that we are the only well-being space for sex workers in Scotland, providing care and no judgment support for sex workers in the country. So
yeah. It's an important place, an organisation for those involved in sex work. Nathalia, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we are going to talk about the infected blood scandal now. That's another big story today. Campaigners have been saying that a lack of government action is actively harming those victims. Thousands of people, you may remember, infected with HIV and hepatitis C through infected blood products in the 1970s and 80s. The public inquiry made its recommendations on compensation back in April of last year, but victims are still waiting for their compensation. In fact, campaigners say since April of last year, 82% of victims died, and ministers are simply dragging their heels on payouts. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi has this report.
How are you all? I'm feeling a little better, so I'm still coughing up a bit of blood. I've had a scan, so we'll all keep the fingers crossed. I love them all.
These were some of the last words Barry said to his family. A day later, he died. In the same week, he was told he would finally receive some compensation from the government as a victim of the infected blood scandal. His wife, Deborah, has received interim compensation, but she continues to fight for others who haven't.
I can't think that the last 30-odd years or Barry dying is for nothing. So I have to have that hope. Without that hope, then I'd be lost.
Debbie is grieving for her husband and fighting for justice. And as an NHS nurse for 47 years, she lives with the guilt of possibly using contaminated blood products on her patients.
The chances of one of those blood transfusions, just one of them being infected, is incredibly high. And that does not sit easy with me, even now. It's a horrible thought.
Last Easter, the blood inquiry instructed the government to pay compensation to bereaved children and parents. A year later, they're still waiting.
The government has accepted the moral case for compensation, and which is why on Monday in the other place we committed to bringing forward amendments at report stage of the Victim and Prisoners Bill with the intention of speeding up the implementation of our response to the infected blood inquiry.
Simon Hamilton and his twin brother were both infected with contaminated blood products. Simon died on Christmas Day last year without seeing justice.
I feel let down. I feel this government has let all of the victims down. It's keeping us on the long finger. I suspect that they're waiting for the next government who come in to deal with this.
The final blood inquiry report is due to be published in May, but campaigners say its recommendations are already known. The scandal that was allowed to happen 30 or 40 years ago could have been addressed, it could have been mitigated. And instead, hundreds of people have died waiting for compensation or justice. The question being asked is how many more will not live to see justice served. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Westminster.
Well, Ashish is with me in the studio now, as well as Stuart McLean, who was infected with hepatitis C when he was just 8 years old. Good evening to you both.
Good evening.
Stuart, I'm going to start with you first. What a story this is. We hear from so many people that have been caught up in this scandal, but this started when you were just 8.
Yeah, I was 8 years old. I had a swollen knee. And I was admitted to Maidstone Hospital. My mum and dad took me in there and they decided to give me 12 units of factor 8, which we didn't know nothing about. We just did as doctors told us at that time. And then when I was 43, 35 years later, a routine doctor's appointment, and she said, I'm worried that you were given blood products when you was a child, that you might be infected.
Because you were in that time bracket.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's not going to be the case, I'm fine. And then she'd done the tests, and then I got the call from my doctor saying, you better come down and see me and bring somebody with you, those famous words. So I went down, and he said, I've got to tell you, they've infected you with Hep C. So 35 years later, I found out.
What was that like?
Broke me. Stood at a motorway bridge to end it all. Because as far as I know, Hep C was to do with drug addicts.
Yeah.
But then you kind of get your head together. And I went and got my medical notes. And when I got my medical notes, all the way through, it mentioned jaundice, jaundice, jaundice. They never done nothing. They just hid it away. And it devastates you. So you lose everything, your job, your career.
And it still affects you now?
Yeah, still. Up until about 4 years ago, I still tried to end it all. It's what it is. So, but trying to get this government to listen is so hard.
Give me an idea of what that is like, because you've been through all of that. You have been to the very bottom. You're thinking about ending your own life because of what has happened to you.
Yeah.
This scandal comes to light. People are with you. Look at those people today that turned out. There's thousands of you. They come out, you speak as one voice.
One voice.
You want justice. You want compensation for the life that's been taken from you. But another battle starts, which is just as hard. What has that been like, trying to get to the end of this? Because compensation, the framework of which, and a lot of it was agreed back in April, and nothing's happened.
The hard thing for me and a lot of other infected victims is the support scheme's already in place, and government passed legislation last year for them support schemes when they paid out the £100,000. This government, Rishi Sunak, could tomorrow hit that button and pay out the infected who are dying. Remember, there's 680 died since the start of this inquiry. One figure in Scotland is 131 deaths. 72 of those have got no spouse, no children. So the government are going to save money on those 72 people. Now, is that why they're dragging their heels?
That is just an awful way to look at things, but that is the belief of so many of you. Ashish, I want you to come in here because you've been speaking to so many people like Stuart who are, let's face it, you know, they've come to terms with what has happened to them in one respect. They're just asking for some redress, some kind of justice. Why is the government dragging its heels? What's the official response been?
The official response has always been we will wait for the full publication of the report, which is in May. But the argument, and you've just heard it there from Stuart, from campaigners, is you know what's in the report, Prime Minister. That has been made clear to you by the inquiry chair, Sir Brian Langstaff, and that in itself is highly unusual to have a public inquiry which is coming to the end of its term, for the chair of that inquiry to go to government and say, before I publish this report, let me tell you what's in it so you can do something about it now before more families have to suffer more anguish. That's highly unusual. So Brian Langstaff reached out to the government and said, this is what's going to be in the report. Appoint a panel, arm's length, independent, to look at it, to come up with the solution and start paying the compensation that is due to these people. And it's not all about money. Of course, that's important. But I spoke to some campaigners today who have lost loved ones, and they said, it just means that somebody has said, we were in the wrong. We've ignored you for years and years. We've turned our backs on you. What we did was wrong. There was an attempt to cover up and to mislead, but we accept this is an injustice. And this money is evidence of that, and that's all they want. They want recognition of what's happened to them, and the money will help, but people are literally dying by the week before they see any compensation.
As your fellow victims today, Stuart, you know, turned out in Westminster to say literally dying for justice. Today, from this point on, what do you want to say to the Prime Minister?
Quite a lot of things, but the most important thing is I can't understand how our Prime Minister can... He's got children. We were all children when we were infected. How he can sit by up until May the 20th, another 24 are going to die. How can he sit there and watch and do nothing? He's got the reporters, as she said, and he's had this report nearly a year, and he's done nothing. He's done absolutely nothing. But he's willing to watch another 24 die to May the 20th. That will turn into 37 come July the 3rd, 25 sitting days after the report. And then what? Is he going to carry on waiting?
Do you know what? Somebody mentioned today that the infected blood scanner is going to be the subject of the next ITV drama. And as one of the victims eloquently put it on Sky News earlier on today, we haven't got time to wait for a drama to come out. We haven't got time for people to watch it and to get incensed. And, you know, much like it's done for the post office scandal, there'll be momentum, but it's still this slow process. Stuart, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us, and I hope we talk again and we have better news.
Hopefully.
We really do.
Hopefully.
And you look after yourself, OK?
Thank you.
Please.
Will do.
See this through, Stuart, see this through.
Hopefully, if cancer doesn't come and get me.
No. We're not thinking like that. We're not thinking like that. Stuart, thank you so much. And Ashish, thank you as well. We continue to follow this story closely here on the UK Tonight. And I do have to say, if you have been affected by any of the issues that have been highlighted as part of Stuart's story, the Samaritans are there. Their helpline 116 123, or you can email joe@samaritans.org. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. We'll be talking about Red Bull F1 boss Christian Horner, cleared of allegations of improper behaviour towards a female colleague. We'll have the details with our sports correspondent coming up next. Also ahead, a woman rushed to hospital and a primary school evacuated after a gas explosion in Greater Manchester. We'll have the details. And find out why thousands of starfish have washed up on Margate Beach.
The toads travel from up here where they spend the summer, and then they go down to their breeding pond down there. And they've been doing this for year after tens and hundreds of years. But we've put a road in the way, and so an awful lot get squashed on the roads now. And it's awful. You see them on the roads, it's just awful, and there's so many that get squashed. So what we've got is a toad patrol. And we're out here with our high-vis, with our bucket, and with our torch in the evenings. And we literally just pick up the toads, carry them across the road so they don't get squashed. When it's damp evenings, it's particularly, that's really a good type of toad. So damp evenings, and when it's a little bit warm, so when it's quite mild as well, they particularly like to go at that sort of time. So if you do see a toad patrol sign around, that's the time not to go down those roads, just go another way. Sometimes we can get hundreds. Sometimes a really busy night, you can get hundreds of toads. So far this year at this patrol, we've saved 1,192 toads. So actually physically pick them up, take them across the road. And last year for toad patrols all around the country, they saved 115,000 toads. So there's about over 200 patrols around the country, all doing the same thing, all on wet evenings in February. And they're picking up toads, and they've saved 115,000. So it's a lot. And I think it's really important to do. It just gives them a fighting chance.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Here's what's coming up. We're going to speak to the filmmaker behind a new documentary with the aim of helping black people overcome their fears of swimming. And Andrew Murray gets his biggest hint yet about when he'll retire from tennis. But first, Prince Harry has lost a legal challenge against the government's decision to take away his police protection when he's in the UK. The High Court rejected his argument that he was being singled out or treated less favourably in the decision to change the level of his taxpayer-funded security. His lawyers say he will seek an appeal against today's ruling. Red Bull Formula One boss Christian Horner has been cleared of any wrongdoing following an investigation into allegations of inappropriate behaviour towards a female colleague. The decision comes just days before the opening race of the new season in Bahrain. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris is here with the details. So, Rob, this involves a big sport, a big figure within the sport, and a big decision today. Talk us through what's been happening.
Yes, it was a month ago that the allegations first emerged in a Dutch newspaper, and Red Bull's parent company in Austria immediately launched an investigation. It led to Christian Horner being questioned for many hours by external lawyers, and we understand the report does run for more than 100 pages. It has now landed, and their conclusion is the fact that Christian Horner has been cleared. They say that the grievance has been dismissed, and in their statement, Red Bull did say that the complainant does have a right to appeal. We don't know her identity or indeed what the next steps could be. But they're saying they're confident that has been a fair, rigorous and impartial investigation, while insisting that they, as Red Bull, will continue striving to meet the highest workplace standards.
Yeah, so we haven't heard from the woman who made the allegations. We're probably not likely to either because, you know, as you said, there is this course for appeal. Does she still work at Red Bull? Do we know that?
That's what we don't know, and her identity is being kept confidential. And
what's the impact of this then on Red Bull, on the F1 season? Is there any at all, or do you think this is going to go away now?
Well, it had been a cloud over the build-up to the season. Christian Horner still attended the car launch a couple of weeks ago, despite the investigation hanging over him. And he's such a significant figure in the sport. Not only is he team principal of the most dominant team in the sport, but, of course, he's a celebrity in his own right through Drive to Survive and also being the husband of Jerry Halliwell.
Yeah, which is what one newspaper led on this story earlier on today. OK, so Christian Horner cleared of wrongdoing. That Formula One season starts next weekend?
It's this weekend, so we've got practice tomorrow, the race on Saturday, and Red Bull trying to win a fourth consecutive driver's title with Max Verstappen. OK,
keeping all the drama on the track. Brilliant. OK, Rob, thank you. Rob Harris, our sports correspondent, with the latest on that story. Now, a woman in her 70s has been seriously injured in an explosion at a house in Greater Manchester. Emergency services were called to the scene of the blast in Nelson Street in Bury this morning. A 200-metre cordon is now in place around that property, with children evacuated from a nearby primary school. The cause of the explosion is currently being investigated. Still to come on the UK Tonight, council bosses warn neighbourhood services will be cut despite a government bailout. We'll discuss just how bad it could be. That's coming up next. Welcome back to the UK Tonight. Now, council bosses say neighbourhood services will have to be cut. That's despite a government bailout. We've all heard about struggling local authorities over the past year, places like Birmingham and Woking, with councils accused of financial mismanagement and poor planning. But according to research out today, the crisis is far worse than thought and much more widespread. A survey of council officials found more than half fear their authorities could go bust in the next parliament unless funding is reformed. Even worse, 9% said their council is likely to go bust within the next year. That perhaps explains the findings of a separate survey, which found 85% of councils are still planning cuts to key services despite extra government support. And more than 2/3 of councils expect to make savings in at least one neighbourhood service. We're talking about things like bin collections, library and leisure services. In the budget next week, the Chancellor is facing pressure from Tory MPs to announce tax cuts. But research suggests that the majority of voters actually want the government to use any fiscal headroom they may have to invest in public services. Only 11% of people want any extra funding to be used for tax cuts. Well, let's talk about this, shall we? We're joined now by Councillor Tett, leader of the Conservative-run Buckinghamshire Council. We're also joined by Jonathan Carr-West, Chief Executive of the Local Government Information Unit, and Isobel Hunter, the Chief Executive of Libraries Connected. Right, OK. Let's start with the findings of one of these reports. Jonathan Carr-West, the Local Government Information Unit have put out a lot of information about the state of local councils up and down the country. How has it got this bad? Because it's not just one or two road councils that have overspent and mismanaged. It's pretty much all of them.
I don't think this is really a story about council mismanagement. Of course, in some of those councils that have gone bust already, we should ask questions about governance and about the decisions that were made. But essentially what's happened over many years is that councils have become much more reliant on local income sources, council tax, retained business rates, fees and charges. And at the same time, the costs and demand for their core statutory duties, adult social care, children's services, housing, have gone through the roof. We've seen massive increases in all of those areas. And that creates a circle that councils are struggling to square.
Jonathan, I'm thinking about the A word, austerity. And we hear this a lot about services being cut so much by the government's austerity measures that local councils are being eroded. You know, council tax and, you know, local income just can't keep up with that. Is that what it all falls back to? Because people are saying that, yes, the government are coming up with a bailout and they're coming up with more money for local councils, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to what has been cut.
Well, I think, you know, we've seen central government funding to councils reduced by about 40% since 2010. We've seen councils across the country taking hundreds of millions of pounds out of their budget. And what that means is now, when we have to make further savings, there are no easy decisions left to make. There's no low-hanging fruit or, you know, easy efficiencies that we can make. Councils are already really close to the bone. And that's why now, with the situation turbocharged by inflation, turbocharged by a cost of living crisis, which makes more people reliant on council services, they're really, really struggling to make ends meet.
It's the perfect, most damaging of storms. Let's bring in Councillor Martin Tett, leader of Buckinghamshire Council. Put us in the picture as to what it's like in Buckinghamshire at the moment. How tight a ship are you having to run? How bad are things?
It's very tough. I mean, local government at the moment is a really tough gig, quite frankly. We've got a situation, as Jonathan's just outlined, where the demand for what are fundamentally four key areas, which is children's services, particularly safeguarding, adult social care, looking after not just the elderly, but working age adults as well, who have some form of special needs, temporary accommodation for homelessness, big increase in that area, and then home to school transport, again, primarily for children with special needs. Those costs have skyrocketed. The demand's gone up, particularly since COVID. We've seen a big increase in the number of children, the complexity of need, and the costs associated with each of them. So even though government funding has increased, what we've actually seen is the cost and the demand go up far more than that. And it's a real problem, quite frankly, trying to square that circle. And that does mean that when those big services, which are statutory, and we get inspected on them by central government, when they grow in pressure, it means that those other services, which are actually the ones that people care about on the doorstep, like bins and roads and or leisure centres and libraries, they're always the ones that feel the financial pressure and have to take the reductions, quite frankly, to square that circle.
Well, at that point, let's talk about libraries, shall we? I'll bring in Isobel Hunter, Chief Executive of Libraries Connected. You heard it, libraries, one of the first things to be on the receiving end of those cuts. How damaging is that to local communities?
Just to make the point that libraries are a statutory service, so local authorities have a legal responsibility to provide a comprehensive and efficient library service. So I really welcome Jonathan's report. I think the report is a shocking read, but it does lay bare the picture that I've known for some time with our members, how difficult it is in councils at the moment and the lack of money. So we set up a support hub for our members, so that's libraries across the country, and 35 libraries have joined that, and that's a fifth of our members are libraries who are already in Section 114, so effectively bankrupt, or they know that their councils may go into it soon, so that's an enormous number. And the kind of things that they're having to look at are closing branches, reducing opening hours, getting rid of staff, reducing activities, not buying books. These are really drastic. These aren't trims around the edges. These are slashes that have enormous impacts on local communities.
Yeah, Isobel, we're talking about things that make a community, aren't we? Of course, you know, bin collection is important, sorting out potholes, all of that. But it's the libraries, it's the swimming pools, it's the play parks. But they are always the first things to go or to be neglected. Sort of, you know, bang the drum for them. Why are they vital?
I think what happens when councils get into this desperate state is that decisions are made. It's often short-term, horrid decisions that have to be made about, you know, where can we get some savings from now in this year, or how can we make savings in the next few months? So that's very different from that when there's time for wiser planning about how can we use our resources most effectively. Because the work that libraries do can really save money for councils down the line. You know, if you think about supporting little children and their language and literacy development, a report this week from National Literacy Trust showed that the cost of the literacy gap in small children at the moment is costing us £830 million a year. So libraries also do work to keep older people healthy and independent. They help people find jobs. You know, the list of things that they do is enormous. But they also build communities, and I think we've seen that this year in the winter when so many people have come to libraries for warmth and help around their finances, and gone away with new connections and ways of accessing support through other charities, through other parts of the council. Libraries are really vital as that network that communities depend on.
Councillor Tett, research shows 9 in 10 councils plan to raise council tax and increase fees and charges for things like parking and environmental waste. Are people actually now going to be paying more for less?
Well, first of all, can I just comment on the library's point? Because I think it's a really well-made point there. Just to say, in Buckinghamshire, we've never closed a library. But what we have done is we've moved away from, if you like, the traditional library model. We have a number of community-run libraries, and all of them now offer a welcoming space for people during, you know, cost of living crises, somewhere where you can come to get warm, you can have free coffee, meet friends, socialise. And it's also a place where you can get access to council services. So it's more than the traditional, if you like, book and talk place. It's absolutely a really vital community asset.
OK, we are just running out of time. I'll put the question I asked you to Jonathan just to round us off then. Jonathan, Carr-West, you know, from what you've looked at, councils, you know, up and down the land, are we going to be paying more for less?
And at the same time, we're going to see many councils edge ever closer to bankruptcy. So it's a no-win situation at the moment. OK, right, Jonathan Carr-West, Chief Executive for Local Government Information Unit, Councillor Martin Tett of Buckinghamshire, and Isobel from Libraries Connected, Isobel Hunter. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on the UK Tonight. Now, the maker of a new documentary wants to help black people overcome their fears and learn to swim. Research suggests only 14% of black children and young people regularly participate in swimming. But in Blackstroke, 3 non-swimmers take up the challenge with some amazing results.
When I hit that water, I felt so victorious. I have had times in lessons where I've been struggling to walk, I've not been feeling well, and in the water, it all fades away and I'm just a different person. And learning to swim has been so freeing. I have sickle cell disease and I can swim.
The fear we have is the fear we created. And that is what is haunting all of us. Everybody, they fail to recognize that. There's nothing you cannot do. Fear is just the word.
Well, it's a beautifully shot film with a really important message. The filmmaker behind that documentary, Olivia Smart, joins me now in the studio, along with swimming coach Harley Hicks, who features in that documentary. Olivia, it's a really thought-provoking film because it started me thinking about, do I know any black Olympic swimmers? There is this stereotype that black people don't swim, and you address this in the documentary. Why did you want to tackle this topic?
I think for me, it was kind of, as a filmmaker, I wanted to look at things that were from my community that I could attempt to address. And I think when I came across that statistic, it was so shocking that I almost didn't believe it. And I thought, let me see if I can try and attempt to solve it in 12 minutes, which I feel like we did.
Yeah. Well, you take 3 black non-swimmers, all with differing barriers of entry, and you talk about their statistics, and they are shocking. Sport England say 87% of black adults don't swim, and 86% of black children don't swim. Harley, you took on these 3 black non-swimmers. Talk to me about their barriers of entry. What was preventing them from getting in the water?
Each one of them had their own individual story as to why they hadn't learnt to swim already. We had one guy who had really long dreadlocks, so his hair was always a barrier, and he couldn't find a hat to fit his head.
Yes, the practical issues as well, isn't it?
The practical issues around getting in the water. And with the others, health issues and, cultural issues as well around parents who don't bring, who didn't bring their children to the pool when they was younger or told them to stay away from water. So between the 3 of them, they all had individual issues that were all quite related to their upbringing and who they were as a person.
Olivia, you wanted to dispel a lot of misinformation about black people and swimming. You say that this misinformation is ingrained in people, black and white. What kind of misconceptions are there? What is it you're trying to dismantle?
I think when it comes to swimming, I wanted to prove that, black people are not swimming because they're lazy. There's a lot of barriers of entry when it comes to learning to swim that they can now overcome. And I think the common myth is that the bone density of black people is significantly heavier than white people. And that is true. However, the difference between them is so minuscule that it wouldn't actually impact your ability to float.
Yeah.
So what a lot of black people say is, my bones are heavy, I'm going to drown, there's no point.
And one of the women in that documentary admits that. She said, I always saw myself more of a sinker than a floater.
Yeah. So I think for me, it was just kind of saying, let's look at all of these things that over the years we've just used as excuses and see if we can tackle them one by one and overcome swimming and, really make it a space where black people feel welcomed and safe and, as people get older with, arthritis and that kind of thing, that black people can swim,
Yeah, Harley, it's about, challenging misconceptions and breaking down barriers. As a swimming coach, do you sometimes look around and go, nobody else around here looks like me?
Yeah.
What is that like? Because, by the sounds of it, you're in a minority in your profession.
Well, yeah, it's quite interesting. When I first got into the industry over 10 years ago, I was the only black person on poolside, coaching or teaching. And, quite a lot of the swimmers who I was coaching at the time were not black or mixed race either. So it was quite interesting to enter into that environment. And now I've come further into the industry and I'm coaching at a national level and going to national competitions, and you really see the further you get up the scale. I think now there is a more of a stronger bottom end of people learning to swim from different ethnic groups. But certainly from a competitive swimming point of view, like you said, the Olympians, the national swimmers, you go to national competitions, I'm probably the only black coach at most pool sides. So, yeah, it's quite interesting.
And there's no valid reason for that. There's no, there's no big reason from stopping people, as you said, apart from this misinformation. And kids as well. You want to get kids in at an early age. And as you've proved, well, actually, I'm probably giving away the end of it. But, you take these people for 8 weeks, don't you, and teach them to swim. And it's so long ago since I learned to swim. I couldn't remember whether it was easy or difficult. But it's accessible, whether you're a child or an adult. That's the main thing to say, isn't it?
It is accessible. And I think also as well, how swimming is taught is important. And what in this 8-week project that we did, I was able to look at each individual and not just say you've got heavy bones or you've got this, you've got that, but actually, what do you need? What does your body need? What does your body composition need? Maybe you need to learn from, using one pathway or a different pathway. And I think too often people are are taught to swim in exactly the same way, regardless of their body composition, regardless of how they present themselves.
Well, Harley, well done you for getting 3 adults to overcome their fears and learn to swim. And Olivia, it's a beautiful film and a really important one as well. Get out there, find your local swimming pool. It's going to be easier when it gets lighter in the morning, isn't it? Swimming when it's cold in the winter. Yeah. Put it on your to-do list for the spring. All right, thank you both so much. I should say that Blackstroke is available on Netflix YouTube channel, not the subscription service. It's well worth 12 minutes of your time. Thank you both.
Cheers.
Right, coming up on the UK Tonight, frustration for Andy Murray after defeat in Dubai. However, the former Wimbledon champion has now set his sights on a new target before he retires.
Tonight on The World, how to handle a problem like Vladimir Putin. We hear from the widow of Alexei Navalny, who says the West's being too soft on the Russian president, while the Prime Minister of Estonia tells me why all options should be on the table when it comes to helping Ukraine. That's all coming up in 15 minutes with me, Yalda Heki.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky's West of England correspondent.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. We help you to understand the world with us.
I'm Adam Parsons, I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Hello, welcome back to the UK Tonight. Teddy is here with the sport. And Teddy, a valuable lesson for journalists. If you keep asking that question, if you keep asking, eventually you will get an answer. And Andy Murray answered a very important question today about when and how he'll retire.
Well, yeah, kind of non-equivocal. He went into this match against Hugo Humbert, the Frenchman, in Dubai in the second round, saying to BBC Radio 4's Today programme, I'm hopefully going to play at another Olympics. He's won 2 titles already, includes the London 2012 as his best moment. But then he lost to Humbert in straight sets, who is higher ranked than him at the moment. He's ranked 67. But during that, there was a lot of frustration on the court for Andy Murray, who was said not to ask him about retirement. He will announce it, but here we can see some frustrating moments for Murray and what he had to say.
I don't have a clue what I'm doing.